So our special guest today is Dr. Stuart Knott. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Stuart, and how you got started in the horror genre.
So I'm a horror writer based in Bedfordshire, and I've been writing for quite a while since I was a little kid. I would always write little stories, and when I got into my teens, I really started writing a bit more seriously. Finished my first novel when I was about 18, 19, but I sat on it for about 10 years, and then while in that period of time, whilst I was at uni, made the transition to horror because it's a lot of fun to write. So
Yeah. So why did you sit on the story for 10 years? Didn't you have the confidence to do it, or was it time?
well, this was back then. You used to have to buy a book full of literary agents and publishers, and you'd print it out and send it off physically. You probably could do it electronically, but it was still kind of physically done. And basically kind of sent it off to a few places, didn't really hear a huge amount back, and got a bit discouraged from that. And life kind of got in the way with like university and everything. And when I printed out the manuscript and went through it, it needed a huge amount of changes. And I sat on it for that long because I knew it was going to take me a long time to rewrite it. But I did eventually manage to get that sorted and get it published. But I did sit on it for a long time. And in that time, a lot of my writing changed. The style changed a bit. So it was really interesting for me getting back into the headspace I was in when I first wrote it as like an angsty teenager.
Yeah.
And then coming back to it when I was like in my early 30s and having to be like, okay, let's get the Linkin Park on and get back into that headspace.
Yeah. So was it sort of like the first horror story that you ever wrote?
No, this one was, I don't really know how to describe that story. This is my urban vigilante coming of age thriller type story. It's not really horror at all. It's more kind of a young adult story for old young adults. It's kind of so it's I didn't do horror until after I'd written that. I think originally my inclination was towards writing sci-fi, but I've never really been able to properly do that. It's always been a difficult one for me to circle back to, and the back of my head is always, can you get back to sci-fi? Can you write something sci-fi? I'm like, I could, but I still got like another urban horror thing going on, or I've got this existential horror at the back of my mind. So it wasn't horror at all. That first, it's the only story I've written that isn't horror at this point. So
fantastic. So walk us through your process of story ideas. So where do your ideas normally come from?
So they used to come from nightmares. I used to have nightmares and I would jot them down and then develop from there. But in the last 10 years or so, I've kind of stopped remembering dreams and nightmares, which has been a bit annoying.
Yeah.
So, but luckily I have a backlog of ideas. So generally I kind of pull from my everyday life around me. So I'll write about when I used to work in retail and how boring that was, and flip it on its head by tossing in like a werewolf or something. Or I would kind of write about home life and how everything's in the suburban home is quite routine and normal, and then you throw in like the old poltergeist. So generally I kind of pull from my everyday life and a lot of media. I'm a big horror movie fan, and I read a fair bit of Stephen King, so I kind of pull a lot of influences from them as well.
So how do you go about creating compelling characters for your stories?
So I normally, when I get an idea, I kind of plot it out as best as I can. I very rarely am a pantser. It's only a couple of times where I'll just sort of write off the top of my head, but I'll plot out the general outline of the story, and then once I've got that sorted, I start creating the main character, where basically it's a rewrite of the synopsis from their point of view, and in that kind of work out who they are, how old they are, where they are in life, what aspects of my personality they're going to have, if any, and then if there's any secondary characters, they kind of bleed off of that. And it usually for me is quite a hierarchy of the main character has the most characterization, and then secondary characters will have some, but they're generally less nuanced. They usually have I feel like I see them as kind of character actors where they have to have a couple of defining traits, but usually only one or two, and they're there to kind of contrast with the main character who are to be a little bit more complex.
Yeah.
So I definitely try to plot them out, but then when I start writing, sometimes they take on that life of their own, and if my writing decides that they've gone down a certain path, then I just go with that and see where they grow and see how that takes them, and if I can loop it around to the intended ending, that's even better.
Yeah. Do you base any of those off experiences or any of your own fears?
Yeah, all of my characters are very much based on different aspects of myself. Sometimes more so than others. Like the first story I wrote, Nightshade, is based on my time as like an angsty teenager. I wrote Here There Be, which is a witch story based in a small village, which is kind of very based on me as a child, as like a preteen. And then lately, a lot of the stuff I've been writing has been late 20s, early 30s. With kind of where I am now, and it'll be sort of different stages of my life, different experiences, and I'll draw from that depending on where those characters are. Like I wrote a character who was a writer who was very frustrated with being self-published and trying to make an impact on social media and actually trying to get his work noticed, and that was me kind of venting my own frustrations with that process, which I think made him quite relatable to a lot of readers, because he wasn't exactly the most forthright or strong character, but that was the point. He was supposed to be kind of bleak and depressing, and I think I had a lot of fun writing that, because normally I like to write my characters to be a little bit cocksure, maybe a little bit snarky, but he was just like, he just wanted to be hidden but also be seen at the same time. So I like to try and pull from different aspects if I can.
Fantastic. Have you based any of the stories off your own sort of like fears or experiences?
Yeah, I will do. Yeah, I usually, a lot of them are based on fears of kind of darkness. There's always like a kind of foreboding, ominous feel of like trying to capture that feeling of nightmares that you just can't quite escape from. But other times I've sort of drawn on fear of like flying, or a fear of failure, or a fear of like the unknown, sort of growing up and like taking those next steps and things like that. So I do try to draw on that. There was fears of like, I haven't touched on all of them. I think I still need to write properly about a character who's afraid of flying, or like going fast and things like that. But yeah, usually I try to pull that. There was we recently, me and my wife recently had a son, and he's 7 months old now. And a lot of my writing lately has been drawing on kind of the fears of like pregnancy and raising a child, and kind of keeping that idea going of like, can you actually look after this small thing that's suddenly in your life, which I didn't intend to do. It just kind of happened as I was writing. I was like, oh, I can touch upon this. I can touch upon like, losing people due to illness, and the general sense of like loss as well is usually in there, because I like to try to tap into those primal fears to try and see if I can relate to people on some level.
Yeah. So in your stories, do you sort of like, are there any particular themes that you follow or have unintentionally followed?
Lately, I have been. Yeah, I've been quite influenced by Lovecraft, even though I didn't actually really enjoy many of the stories I read of his, which is kind of this idea of this unknowable darkness that lurks outside of our reality, and how that is kind of influencing the world around us in terms of like unquiet spirits or demonic forces and things like that. And they usually kind of manifest in a way that relates to fears regarding like abuse and loss and struggles. So I do abuse as well tends to come up quite a bit in my stories. It's like, well, if characters are going through a hard time, then you could relate the supernatural events they face to that. And sometimes that's more explicit than others. They'll usually be like, if they've lost someone, the person they've lost, their image is kind of evoked in this kind of horrific way by whatever's haunting them. That turns up quite a lot as kind of an explicit personification of that fear of loss. So that does come up quite a bit.
So you're a doctor. Are you
Yes.
a general doctor or are you a specialized doctor?
I have to disappoint you by just saying I'm a PhD graduate, so I'm not actually like a medical doctor.
Right.
So I can't help you with any like boils or lesions or aches and pains you might have. I studied adaptations, just kind of like advanced film studies.
Yeah.
So I wrote about movies that were based on video games and comic books, and spent a lot of time writing about zombie movies and kung fu movies. So that kind of tied into my cinephile ways. So I'm much more of an academic doctor than a medical one, unfortunately. If I have any medical ailments, I usually Google them and then get sent into a spiral of paranoia and depression. So
I was going to ask if you used any of that sort of like in your writing as well.
Usually I haven't quite touched on that aspect yet. It's usually occasionally characters will either have been to university or make mention that they've had some time at uni. But the way I write, I'm always kind of like 10 years behind where I am right now. So I haven't written yet a story which is based at university when I was first there as an undergraduate. That's still kind of to come. So I have no idea when I'll get around to actually writing about my time as a PhD student. But that's not that exciting because I did a lot of my PhD student stuff was very much, I went in once or twice a week. It wasn't like living it like I was at undergraduate.
Yeah.
But it did kind of teach me about time management and kind of keeping track of how much I'm doing. And I like to think it's given me a good head for attention to detail. But then I read through some of my stuff and see the errors, and I'm like, oh crap, I've got to change this and edit this. I think it definitely helped, but as anyone who's written reports or essays at university will probably agree that it doesn't really prepare you for writing like fiction, because all the rules that you learn at uni don't really apply, like double spacing and the presentation and the voice is all very different from one to the other. But it definitely did, like, I'm used to writing, so, and it got me used to staring at a screen and procrastinating as well. Got to stare at that wall for a couple of hours. It's half my university life is just staring at a wall or being drunk. So.
So what's the hardest part that you think of writing a horror book itself?
I think for me, the hardest part is always getting started. Even when you have an idea, like it's the blank page. I know I've always said like, oh, this next story or this next book could be the last one because I don't know if I've got any more in me, which is why I've kind of pivoted lately towards writing short stories that are about 5 to 30,000 words long and then collecting them together in my own anthologies, because I know I can write a shorter story, but if I look at an idea, even before I've plotted it out, I can kind of tell how much legs it's got. And I look at it and I think this is never going to be 300,000 words unless, I mean, if Stephen King wrote it, it would be like 15,000 pages or something. But I'm like, I'm not going to drag this out a huge amount because I just want it to be the story that it is. So for me, the hardest part is the blank page. A lot of people say it's editing, but I actually enjoy editing because when you edit, you've written the story, you've done it. So you just go back through it and you're checking for errors and you're adding and you're taking away and you can expand on it, which for me is a lot easier to do than creating that blank page, especially with, family and work and everything and time always being against you. With edits, I feel much more relaxed because I know, I can get a few drafts out and I can finalize it and I can get people to look at it. So it's kind of getting my template document up, getting all the admin sort of sorting the folders out, getting everything ready, getting all the plots there, and then it's like, okay, chapter 1, will the story come out? And so far they have. So far they've all come out, but there's always that lingering doubt of maybe this one won't. And it's like, oh well, if that happens, then that's probably it. But so yeah, it's always just getting started, finding the time to get started is the hardest part for me.
Yeah. So what's been the most difficult story or the most difficult scene that you've ever had to write?
Oh, that's a good question. None of them have really been too difficult to really write. Some of them have been difficult when I've been in the middle of them. Like I just finished the first draft of my most recent whip yesterday, and I was reading through it, checking for errors and everything, and I was certain that I was going to have to make major changes. I was 100% sure that, because I've been writing it since April, so it's been on and off, a very stop and start. I stopped to write a couple of other short stories in the meantime, and I was like, there's no way this is going to hold up. And actually it held up quite well, and I was quite happy with it. And I thought, okay, maybe I can still change it. It still needs refining, but I was much happier with it than I thought. But generally, I'm quite weird and sadistic in that even when I'm writing scenes which are uncomfortable, like maybe scenes of abusive stuff, or killing pets or whatever, animals and stuff, I don't usually find it particularly difficult. I usually just kind of think, okay, just write it, just write what you can, and then look back at it and think, is this too extreme? And if it is, then kind of make those changes. Or if I'm feeling particularly sadistic and I'm like, maybe I want it to be splatterpunk and really extreme, just kind of leave it. So it's usually the hardest thing for me it was definitely with that first manuscript of Nightshade, was like looking at this huge pile, knowing that so much of it would have to be cut out. That was difficult. But since I wrote that story, I've learned from it to not do that, to kind of make the first draft as perfect as I can, so that whenever I'm doing edits, it's just kind of refining it and adding stuff in or taking it out. So yeah, most scenes aren't massively difficult as long as I have a sense of what I'm going to write. If I didn't have an idea, then that's probably the most difficult part, is trying to think, okay, I need to create a new character now. How are they going to be different? Where do they fit? So that can be difficult, but luckily, especially with shorter stories, if it's only like 30,000 words, usually I limit the cast to about 4 characters anyway. So that kind of makes it a bit easier. A lot of preparation kind of goes into it to try and make it as easy as possible.
Fantastic. So have you had any memorable pieces of feedback that sort of like have stuck with you?
I've had some. I had Nat Whitson did a review of Stitchface earlier this year, and she messaged me and asked me if I'd been through some of the stuff that was happening in it, because it's very much about a mother who, as a teenager, was survived an attack by this kind of Halloween slasher killer. And her whole life has been haunted by the trauma of seeing her friends be killed and like trying to overcome her fears and everything. And she said to me, like, this is so like true to life. I really felt this. Did you go through some sort of trauma like this? And I was like, no, I'm just crazy. I'm just mental and just kind of dreamed this up, and was trying to think, how can I put this character through as much hell as possible, and just dreamed it up. But just the idea that she was so affected by it that it felt like I was pulling from a real experience was a great compliment, because I was really going for that. And a lot of people, when they reviewed Here There Be, said, oh, it reminds me of It by Stephen King. And I was really happy about that, because that was entirely my intention. It was very influenced by It, with my own spin on it. So I was really glad that people made that connection, because that's what I was going for. And then miscellaneously, and anytime people message me or do a review and they say, oh, I interpreted it this way, and it is a way I didn't expect. So I'm like, oh yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it, and I always appreciate that, good or negative, positive or negative feedback. I'm like, it's all feedback, so as long as people have read it, that's the main thing for me.
Yeah, that's right. So, have you got any exciting projects that you're currently working on?
So I just finished this whip that I've been working on all year. I'm quite excited about that. I'm tentatively hoping to have that. I might even have that out in December, but I know I need to kind of go back to it a bit more. I've got a short story featured in an anthology. The first time I've been included in an anthology, it isn't one of my own. It's going to be in Doors of Darkness, hopefully sometime in December. We haven't got an exact release date yet. And about 3 other short story pieces pending acceptance or rejection from a couple of other places, so that's kind of exciting. I've enjoyed this last couple of years writing 3 to 5k short stories and sending them out into the ether to try and spread my wings a bit and get a bit more exposure. That's been quite exciting. But the back of my mind, I'm hoping that next year I might start focusing on a longer piece. But the main reason I've been putting that off is because I know it will take me a long time to do, and I worry that I will focus on writing a longer piece. It could take maybe a year or a year and a half, and in that time I won't write anything else because I like to focus on one project at a time, and I kind of will lose relevancy because of that. So I'm mentally kind of trying to come up with an idea of focusing on a longer piece, but also giving myself a month or 2 here or there to write some shorter pieces to kind of just keep those going, because the acceptance, hearing back from submitting a piece can take a long time. So you have to kind of factor that in, where it's like, well, this anthology is calling for submissions, and the submission deadline is November, but you may not hear it till March, and it might not be released until September. So that's like a year in a way. It's a long time to wait. So it can be good to have those side projects going at the same time. So I'm quite excited about what's coming up, but I'm also excited about taking a bit of a break because it's been a bit full on. So always good to take a break.
And you also had a story appear in the Unveiling Nightmares magazine, didn't you, as well?
I did. That was really exciting for me. That's the first time I've been paid for a piece to be published. That was exciting. That was on my list. That was, I think there's about 6 different places I submitted short stories to, and that was one of them. And I was really happy to see that included in there. So that was exciting. I hope people enjoy that one. That was fun to write.
Fantastic. And people can actually see that on the website as well, because it is on there. Okay, so,
yeah. I'm keeping an eye on that to see if there's any if I have any other inspiration to submit for that. But I do have a thing of when you've submitted to one place and been accepted, like an anthology or a magazine, I kind of feel like it's kind of a good idea to maybe give it a bit of a break. But if you submit every single time, it's kind of, you could, I don't know. I like to see fresh names every time. So I don't like to force it. Like, I was asked to submit a short story for an autumn themed piece earlier this year, and I had 2 other submission pieces I was working on and my whip all at the same time, and I just didn't have. I'd already, Stitchface is very Halloween based. I then wrote another short story that was Halloween based that came out in Tales from Deranged Minds recently, and then this autumn anthology was also quite Halloween based, and I was like, I don't think I've got any more Halloween left in me, to be honest. So I think the deadline was like a week and a half, and I was like, and the max word count was something like 20,000 words, and I always like to aim for the maximum word count. I was like, I don't think I can meet this, which was a shame. I really wanted to be included in that, but I was like, well, I'll pin the tab and come back to it and maybe prepare something and sort of bank it, and maybe we'll see what happens.
So what advice would you give to somebody who wants to write a horror book?
I think my main piece of advice is to give yourself a break. I think a lot of writers put so much pressure on themselves, and that's not a lot of people write and perform better under that pressure, but I do think it ends up adding up. Like a lot of people have a lot of self-doubt and kind of will write a lot of work and then kind of ditch it or think it's not very good. And I'm like, I feel like if you just give yourself a bit of a break, then maybe that will help kind of the way you look at your work. But definitely, if you're writing horror, like don't be afraid to kind of push the boundaries a bit. Don't worry about if you're going to upset people, because it's horror. That's kind of the point, is to not necessarily just to scare, but also to make people cringe and to make them uncomfortable and to make them think a little bit differently, or to make even if it's to make them feel a bit nauseated. But if you've got the story in you, then write the story you want to write, and then once you've got it out, you can think about editing it or changing it or cutting some stuff from it. But just just write what you want to write and what you've got in your head, and don't compromise that vision, unless you have to be accepted to a submission. But even then, you want to try and stay as true to your vision as you can.
Fantastic. So tell us where we can find your books.
So all my books are on Amazon, on .com and .co.uk. So they're all on there. They're all available as ebooks. They're all available as paperback, and quite a few are available as hardback as well. If you're so inclined, I've recently did some changes because Amazon changed their fee policy. So I did some edits to the books to make the page count a bit shorter, to reduce the price of quite a few of them. I also just came off the back of a free promotion. So because of that, there won't be another one for a little while, because Amazon likes to give you a bit of a gap for that. But yeah, they're all on Amazon, easily searchable.
Fantastic. Well, it's been wonderful having you on the show, Stuart. So is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I'm really glad to have come on and to have had a chat with you. It's been nice connecting with you, and I kind of bombarded you a bit where I was like, "Oh, can I come on the podcast?" Oh, actually, I'm also submitting to your magazine, and but it's been really fun. It's been really fun connecting with you and seeing the different avenues that you're offering to indie writers. And I've been trying to share it as much as I can. My reach is only really on Facebook and Threads at the moment, but I still network with quite a few authors, and when I do, especially to those who haven't been published or have something coming up and they need to promote themselves, I usually drop a few names, and yours is one of them that I've been pushing to them. So hopefully people will reach out. And I would say to listeners, if you have a book and you want to promote it, like, don't be afraid to do like a podcast or something. It's not always on a camera, and it's just fun to talk about your work, especially to people who are actually interested in hearing about it. So thanks for having me on to rant.
No, you very